I apologize for that buzzing. But hello everyone, welcome. I will speak louder and clearer than the buzzing so you don't actually hear it. And it will soon go off. Um, Welcome to Chicago Narratives, Finding a Creative Home Artist Panel. This event is presented as part of Art Design Chicago, an initiative of the Terra Foundation for American Art in partnership with artists and organizations across the city. Art Design Chicago is a series of events and exhibitions that highlight the city's artistic heritage and creative communities. We have Shireen Ahmad, co-founder of the South Asian Institute, to thank for the idea behind tonight's panel. And it is the product of months of collaborative planning between Art Design Chicago partners whose exhibitions and programming involve ideas of immigration, migration, and displacement in the Chicago creative landscape over time. Today's panelists are all exhibiting artists in these exhibitions who have experienced different journeys, but all call Chicago their creative home today. Our panelists are Vida Sajid, representing the Newberry Library's exhibition, Making an Impression, Immigrant Printing in Chicago, which begins December 12th. Melissa Leandro, representing Agency, Craft in Chicago from the 1970s to 80s and beyond at the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art, currently open until January 26th. Carlos Barberena, representing Intuit Chicago's Catalyst, Immigrant Communities Near Self-Taught Artists, which an exhibition that begins April 2025. And Indira Johnson, representing both South Asian Institute's What is Seen and Unseen, Mapping South Asian American Art in Chicago, and Ukrainian Institute of Modern Arts Agency Craft in Chicago exhibition. We will give them each some time to introduce themselves and tell us about their work before the panel begins. You can also refer to the takeaway document you received when entering to learn more about those exhibitions as well. While we are gathered here to learn and discuss the works of these four great artists who have made Chicago their homes, we must remember and reflect on the fact that we live on the occupied ancestral homelands of indigenous folks. Chicago is the ancestral homeland of the Potawatomi Nation, the Odawa, Ojibwe, Miami, Peoria, Kickapoo, and Ho-Chunk nations, as well as many other tribes that have relationships with this land and with each other. This land continues to tell their stories, past, present, and future, and it remains a home and gathering place to many thriving and diverse indigenous communities today. We honor this history and the people who stewarded this land for centuries before us and those who continue to nurture it today. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Mariela Acuna. Mariela Acuna is an art administrator and curator from San Jose, Costa Rica, currently based in Chicago. As exhibitions and residency manager at Hyde Park Art Center, her primary role is to steward the Jackman Goldwasser Residency, which invites local, national, and international artists and curators to hone their practice, develop research, and expand their networks in the context of a community-focused contemporary art center. At the Art Center, Mariela also curates exhibitions, manages the micro-publishing platform Green Lantern Press, and with a small team manages the innovative regranting initiative Artists Run Chicago Front. I now please welcome Mariela to introduce our artists.
Thank you, everybody. And I guess I want to start with thanks to Lysandra for inviting me to moderate this panel, to Eva, to Jenny, and to our hosts tonight for encouraging this conversation. And also, can you hear me? Hello? really appreciate the spirit of this conversation. As someone who arrived in Chicago, like most of us, I arrived here 5 years ago, and I have felt Chicago become a creative home for me. And so it feels that the spirit of the city is the spirit of welcoming people, and I have felt welcomed and appreciate the space to talk about that very beautiful part of the city that we live in. And then I'll transition to our introductions. Each artist will introduce themselves through a very small presentation, and then we will have a few questions, and then we'll welcome questions from the audience. So, Carlos, you're up first.
Hi everybody. This on? Yeah. So I'm Carlos Barberena. I'm a self-taught artist, printmaker from Nicaragua. I have been living and working in Chicago since 2008. I have my studio at home that is called Bandolero Press. That is like mostly publishing my own work and helping another artist that they don't have access to printmaking equipment, sorry, to produce some work. As you see, my work is very related with immigration, and this piece I did in 2019, and it was a reaction about what was the narrative during that time and how they were referring as caravans that they were coming to United States, invaders. And so it was like a kind of reflection about why it is why is people moving to this country, why these people is just leaving their home, their families, and it's also because the policies of this country affecting those countries made displaced all those people, as is in my case. I'm an immigrant. I left my country when I was 13 years old. I moved to Costa Rica with a visa. I stayed there undocumented until I could apply to refugee. But also it was very hard for me being a kid, and just it was the first time that I started feeling the other, just a feeling discrimination and xenophobia. So in the way that I was dealing, not also with the pain of leaving my country, but also with facing all these kind of things, it was through art. So it was the way that I just dealing, kind of a healing with all the pain. So mostly my primary media is relief print, woodcuts, lino cuts, and I use this media to just, to approach to a wider audience with my critical message. And so this is another piece that I did in 2020, and it's from a series that is called Essential for Your Colonizer Comfort. And this is one of the pieces, and it's talking about how we were calling undocumented workers as essential, but just to use them, instead being aware of all the things that they were confronting as with the pandemic, and also not having paper and just not looking for their basic rights, and they were just confronting exploitation or imminent deportation. So this is mostly kind of my art that I do.
one of the very first sculptures that I made. I was the second daughter in a family of 6 girls, and that has been a defining sort of event or a defining factor in my life, because at that time in India, girls were not valued at all. In fact, every time one of us, the wrong one. Okay, every time one of us was born, the whole neighborhood would come and condone with my family that they were really sorry. So this was something that my parents thought that education was the way that their daughters would be as good as anyone's sons. My father was an artist. I have a little bit of allergies, so my voice might be a little weird. My father was an artist and an ardent supporter, a follower of the teachings of Gandhi. And my mother was a social activist. She was the founder of a health and community development organization that dealt with TB and leprosy control. And so this combination of art and activism has been part of my work from the very beginning. I was, all my formal art education was in advertising design. And so both in India, and then I came here to the School of the Art Institute, got an MFA in advertising design, and worked for some major advertising design companies here in the US. And so I pretty much self-taught as a sculptor and self-learned. But there were various opportunities to learn, and I think the most important ones for me would be, I did a residency in the northern villages of India, the village of Mithila, where the women paint on the walls of their homes. And art is very much part of everyday life. You see that it's not even a special word, it's like something that everyone does, and it's taken for granted. And that was sort of a new idea for me. And then the second residency that had a great impact on me was at the Kohler Foundry. So I spent a number of months there, and that opened me up to the idea that there were so many other possibilities. I love clay, and I still do a lot of work with clay, but that I could use so many other materials. This piece is a much more recent piece. The brass casting was made at Kohler. And then I've sort of transformed it now, because that was made a while back. And given the situation that we are facing today, I thought the title of Can You See Me Now was very appropriate. Because the idea of celebrating the idea that, we are resilient in so many different ways. So even though the form is broken in some ways, there is a courage and I think that's in that form. The last thing I'd like to say is that I've always wanted to do public art as well, and community engagement projects. And so to do that, there were 3 things that I felt were very important for me, is that to make art part of everyday life as far as possible, to involve local voices in the art process, and to cultivate peace as individual action. And so I've done a number of community projects using those themes. And the one that is still around everywhere that people may be aware of is the 10,000 Ripples project, where it's now 12 years old, and it started with peace and nonviolence going across 10 neighborhoods. And now you can see an installation on Lakeshore Drive, the Emerging Buddhas, or in front of, by the Museum of Science and Industry. But I think that shows that art can be a catalyst for conversations about peace and nonviolence. And so that was the whole goal of that project. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
life, our life. And I think for them it was very, very brave to kind of venture off and to be completely alone in a new country, not speaking the language, and also not having any other family member here. So I can't imagine the feeling of isolation that they must have felt, and that I think that I felt then later on for the rest of our lives here. We were lucky enough to be able to go back and forth to where my family is from, Costa Rica, which some of the panelists have had experience being there. Yeah. Which my family is from a very rural part of Costa Rica, essentially in the mountains, in farm country. They're farmers. And growing up in Miami, if you know anything about Miami, it's quite an urban, neon lights, kind of party city vibe. So two very different places that I was kind of oscillating with for the early years up until I was about 20. And I think that really shaped a lot of my practice and the way that I work with color and the materials that I use. Having to go back and forth and essentially, I guess, culture shift between Costa Rica and between my identity in the United States was very jostling and kind of pulling me back and forth between speaking English and speaking Spanish one day, going to a very rural country and being surrounded by my entire family, and then suddenly being completely on our own in the United States. Jump forward, I decided to move to Chicago, and I also went to the Art Institute of Chicago for my master's degree, and I now teach there. And at that university, I learned to weave, to stitch, to sew, and I kind of stumbled into textiles really by accident. I think I have a really big interest in working with my hands and essentially making something out of nothing, which is, I think, so much the groundwork of weaving and quilting practices. And so, oh, thank you. So my pieces, I often call them essentially world building. I think having called so many different places in my life home, Chicago, Miami, Costa Rica, I think I do that now abstractly through my work. And so I'm often pulling from imagery from my daily life. I'm pulling images from memories, conversations with my mother over the phone, little knickknacks and tokens that she sends me in the mail. They get imprinted, and then they get translated into woven form, into stitched form. They're dyed, they're torn, they're put back together and taken apart again. And I think that really for me resonates with, what my family kind of experienced coming to the US. My dad's a construction worker, and he has a lot of pride in the things that he's created. I mean, if ever I'm in a car with my father, the first thing he says to me is like, oh, I helped to build that, or I laid the plaster down on that. And he has a real sense of pride about creating this life for himself in the US. And so I think for me, I'm sort of creating these worlds and oases and refuges for myself through these imagined and abstract spaces. I have my time. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, my name is Vida Sacic, and I am a printmaker. I am somebody that works with movable type, so I work a lot with language that is printed using printing plates. The work that is shown here is my piece, Homebody Land, that is featured in an upcoming exhibition at the Newberry Library. The work itself is actually prints that are quite large. They're 44 by 58 inches. So the plates that it has died. Okay, it has come back. So the printing plates that I work with are pretty big, especially in this case. I have to handle each letter, pick it up. It's I'm handling it with two hands and having to slam it on the press and really use my body in making my work. And I'm really interested in that process of printing as informing what I am making. This particular piece was also inspired as my background, as an immigrant. I'm somebody that came to the U.S. when I was 17 exchange student, and I ended up staying here. I came to Indiana actually, so I'm a Midwesterner, I guess, kind of. I'm from Croatia, but I came here when I was 17 and then ended up, going to IU, Indiana University Bloomington, getting trained there in printing, moving to Chicago about 15 years ago, and since then I've had a studio here printing. And what I really loved about coming to Chicago was that it is this place that is really welcoming. I found people like me here. I found people that are from where I'm from, but I've also found community of folks that are from other places that have uniquely supported my practice and have created, a community anew. And I'm really interested in working with that community and connecting it also to where I come from. I just completed an exhibition, a solo exhibition in Croatia. This is just one slide from a show I had this summer in Dubrovnik, Croatia. But I was working with some people from my artistic community. I see some of you in the audience. And a couple folks that have worked downstairs in the exhibition as well, who I visited and had studio visits with different artists and then ended up printing their words and exhibiting them, taking this work back to Croatia and connecting it to where I come from. So a lot of my work is about like that outreach and creating that connection and sort of thinking of myself as a connecting tissue between these spaces. Yeah. I think that's it.
Hello?
Yeah.
This one's still.
Okay.
So, thank you everybody for such generous introductions. I think you all shared so much about your story, and I think it's really helpful. My first question was going to be about our relationship with this idea of migration. And I wanted to ask that not to be nosy, but to make visible the diversity of experiences that people who identify as immigrants can have. There are so many different words to define particular experiences within migration. You can be an immigrant, a migrant, a refugee, an exile, an expat, and they all kind of point to different levels of privilege within that experience. And I think particularly in a political climate where, we talk about migration as a problem so often, it feels important to just highlight all the different ways in which people live that identity. So I don't know if it's worth kind of staying with that question of how we identify within that experience, and maybe in particular, how does that show up in your work? To start, I feel like a few of you touched on that, but is there a little bit more we want to share?
I think for me, it's a little bit of going, I think, back and forth between where I plant myself. I don't know if some of you feel that. Having lived, I guess, in Chicago, close to 20 years now, and being so far away from my family, who is, for me, my anchor to my cultural identity in a lot of ways, but that is almost like a moving target. I think my mother, in a lot of ways, acts as my anchor. I have these like beautiful conversations with her in Spanish, and it's my way to kind of reconnect to this sort of world that we know. But in the rest of my life, the rest of the days, I sort of put on the English hat, the American citizen hat, and I function in this other space, in this other way. I think my work has that same sort of erraticness in the way that if you look at some of my pieces, they're very aggressive kind of mark making that is happening through textile processes, through hand embroidery, through machine embroidery, through jacquard weaving. These actions that are both slow and fast. There's a tearing away and a building up of the structure. I think it's because I feel like I know who I am and how I identify, but that is so blurry and gets blurrier and blurrier the further I am away from Costa Rica, the further and less often I talk to my family, and then also navigating just other cultural and community relationships we engage with here.
Yeah, I really relate to what you're saying, because also this idea of process of building and tearing up, you know, it is something that it really comes up in my work, and I think that as somebody that's always carrying things with you, you know, I think an immigrant or a person that has moved from somewhere to somewhere is somebody that has like stuff that is coming with them from one place to another, you know, and that's become a big part of my practice, is to like taking resources from where I'm coming from and using them to build something, and then like kind of tearing it up, getting rid of things I cannot save. You know, I work with printing plates that I'm importing from places, so that it's really literal that way in my practice. But then also I have like, you know, a really heavy printing press that grounds me to a specific place. So like home is where the press is really like my reality, right? Yeah. And you know, I had to, the press I have here is 700 pounds, so I had to, you know, plant it here. And I wanted to buy one in Croatia, but my parents said they didn't have a place to put it, which, like, I'm not really buying from them. Like, okay, mom. But, you know, but I think there is this idea of travel and planting yourself, you
and
know.
I think as an artist,
Yeah.
you become this holder of equipment and materials, right? Like that are rich in the things that you make, but they also ground you then to a new place, right? I think the more established you become as an artist, you have this hub or you have this maker space that you then, it's rooting you in a lot of ways to a certain place and to a community of people.
Yeah, and that can be exciting, but I think it has its challenges probably too.
I think being an immigrant, you see things differently. I think that for me, that's one of the major things that, for example, I think probably around 10 years ago or something, right after, actually it was right after 9/11, there was this very, you saw God Save America everywhere, you know, and I thought that was great, but I'm originally from India, and I have friends in Pakistan, I have friends in Africa, I have friends in Sweden. My husband's from Sweden. So it's like, I did this huge piece that said, God Save America, and then I put all the countries that I have friends in. And so it was just to say that, to make people think, you know, that that's not completely universal, that we're talking about God saving, hopefully, everybody. So I think it's the immigrant is someone who thinks in a different way because they've come from a different background. So for me, that has been, I think, most important, that idea of how you think. I've used a lot of, maybe I'm going to the next question, of what you've used. Should I go ahead or you want to? What I've taken from, or some of the things that I've taken from my background in India. I grew up in Mumbai, but then we lived in Sweden for 2 years as well. So I've got that sort of connection to Sweden. But I've taken the rituals that were part of our family background, which were family rituals, female family rituals, meant to bring protection and well-being to your family. And I've done a hybrid version of that, to say that instead of it being the well-being of my immediate family, it should be the well-being of the whole community. And so that those rituals, like the Rangoli drawing, which I've done a number of times, in fact, I started doing that right after 9/11 in downtown Evanston. We're just trying to bring people together so that they had a chance to come together and heal themselves just by talking. or the entryway hanging. I think you'll see a traditional entry hanging in the gallery downstairs. But I've done it in a way where I get people to help in actually making the various components of the entryway hanging, which was meant to bring blessings on the family. So I think just bringing these traditions that have their roots in sort of well-being and getting people to participate in it is something that, as an immigrant, I have brought, I think, to this country, and all of us bring those I don't know, cultural references to the country, which I feel enriches the whole country. Did you want to say anything?
Well, just thinking about this, like the process of immigrating from one country to another, and how we were affected with that, and I think I immigrated first because the civil war in Nicaragua to Costa Rica, so and it was like a new experience, so and you are like learning, and you are looking for your own identity, and also like train you like how to deal with all those kind of narrative. So when I moved here, so I was kind of like prepared for that. So and it's like always like reflecting about how my own experiences relate with another communities that they are experiences similar struggles. So I think it's very important of just like keep working with the community, and just like working together with another cultures, and just learn about it, and I think it's not kind of like a assimilation, but it's like a learning from each other. So.
Thank you. The next question I have is about this idea of belonging, which I think shows up in a lot of narratives about migration. I think we've poked or pointed at it in a few of your conversations so far, and so I for us who are part of a diaspora, who have the experience of migrating, this idea of not being from either here or from there, or maybe even the flip experience, which is really beautiful, which is us having the capacity to feel at home in various different places, which you've talked about. And even you, Indira, just mentioned the idea of how migrating has expanded your worldview, and that's something I think about often, not only as an immigrant, but as someone who works with artists and cultural workers facilitating cultural exchange, just the capacity to know someone different than you, and come at a relationship with enough humility to learn from it, I think is something that has shaped my experience of movement. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, this idea of belonging, asserting your belonging where you go, or if that shows up in your work or in your experience as a person.
I guess what I was thinking a lot about was, and maybe we have this in common, but like a resourcefulness. I think that immigrant experience, or the proximity to that experience, just breeds both like in our work and how we approach like the idea of belonging. Well, you have to create that, right? That doesn't just like come at you. You don't just suddenly like assimilate. That takes work, and I think a resourcefulness that I see a lot within my family, and I feel like I've also inherited That's a resourcefulness in figuring out how to access materials in order to produce work, how to be sustainable. I mean, for a long time, you know, I never thought I would go to college. I'm sure my family didn't either, having come to this country. But going to college and then eventually just owning my own home, where we were talking about this before we started, and just having a place that I could call my studio. That is for an artist, that's a huge aspiration. To have a place of business to be sustainable and to support yourself and create belonging through grinding and being resourceful. I think so much of that was inherited through, you know, just witnessing my mother and my father kind of grapple through struggling their way through learning English, struggling their way through gaining their citizenship, you know, quizzing them through the residency test, you know, all these things that are behind the scenes that we don't see in order to kind of function and kind of exist as an artist. That's a privilege. I think that that lifestyle is a privilege that not a lot of, I mean, my mother's a housekeeper and my father does construction work, so I think art is miles away from any reality that they experienced, but.
Thanks, I'm like nodding, yes. Yes, but no, I totally, yeah, I agree. It's a huge privilege that I think we can, you know, we can earn in this, or we have built here for ourselves in this country, and it takes immigrants extra work to try to make things happen because they don't have, you know, the resources that perhaps somebody that is well established here has. And I think this idea of creating belonging for yourself also reminds me of this, you know, this dream, this kind of like belief, this maybe kind of crazy belief that sometimes immigrants have, which is that they carry a certain sense of belonging like with them, that they have in them the seeds that they can't take and transplant somewhere else and flourish in another environment. And kind of like what Indira, you were saying too about bringing with you the rituals of your background and the memories of your ancestors and the memories of who you are, you know, and carrying them in this space, I think is really important to me as well, because I believe that I am, you know, that within myself, I kind of carry the goods of my country in a way. You know, I'm somebody whose history is a little bit complicated because I grew up in a country that fell apart. We had a civil war, you know, and the country that I'm from came out of that time. So I'm a transitional kid that lived through a time of change, and I understand the fragility of this idea of being from a country, a land, a place. Like, what does that mean? Is really interesting to me. But what I do know is that I carry the seeds and the information of that within me, and that I'm able to connect to very well to those who came from where I come from, that we create that community when we're together, but also folks that may be coming from somewhere else, with whom I then create a community, like in this space, for instance. So this idea of like, I love it that when you talked about this idea of carrying within you this ancestral histories and essentially archival knowledge that has allowed you to flourish here.
Your belonging, I think that word is fraught with complexities, with dichotomies, and I had a show at the Highland Park Arts Center last year, and the title of the show was Belonging. So it was a play on the word belonging. But in order to write the essay and to do the work, I started to investigate that word as to what it meant to me, you know. And I think there were many more questions. I know when I first moved to the US, I realized that the place that I thought I belonged to back in India was no longer there, because that had changed. And I would go there and I would think, oh my God, what is this, you know? Because that had completely changed. And so I was sort of not belonging there and not quite belonging here. The histories that are shared, like even with my husband, he has a history that was way before me, you know, and so we don't have that shared history. And so that idea of belonging, was something I had to investigate more. And I think it prompted me to ask myself the question of where do I want to belong? You know, I think that's a question. Where do you want to belong? And how do you make that space where I think all of us, whether you're immigrants or not immigrants, we all want to belong somewhere where we are loved and we are cherished and nurtured and feel respected. So I think that is something that we all want. Maybe the immigrant has a more complex attitude of belonging. And so every time I feel like I'm really comfortable here, then someone asks me, where did you come from? And so it's like, if I say I'm from Evanston, they say, no, but where did you really come from? You know, so you know what they are trying to get at, you know, and so that's, but I think it's figuring out for yourself. And as I have been more confident in myself, I have felt more like I have found a place where I belong.
Yeah, I think is very interesting, the part of where you belong, and I like what Vida said, like where your press is your home, you know, because I have the same problem. And but I think sometimes it's kind of like we need like just unlearn a lot of things, because it's one of the things that always like when you are in another country is like you are not from here, but you are living there, you are like sharing, you are like changing the spaces. And I think, I don't know when it started, but I think there is this movement that I'm from there, I'm from here, just reclaiming the spaces, you know, like just like going against like, oh, you are not from here. So I thinking more about what we have been learning in this racial like a system, you know, like it's just like to make invisible all those people that they don't have documents, but they have been living the whole life here. So, and they have been like working and changing and apporting to the economy of this country, but it's like oh, you are not from here. No, I'm from here. You know, I'm doing the same thing like another like a citizen. So I think it's kind of like I'm more interested in that part, like I belong, I'm from there and I'm from here, and you know.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate that at bits of conversation, all of us have talked about Chicago as a home, you know? So I think that's a nice transition into our next question, which is, how has arriving to Chicago affected your creative practices? And I mean that in terms of, you know, very holistically. You know, Chicago is a really special city. It is, you know, made of so many immigrant groups. In terms of, well, I feel like I'm going to answer the question if I continue to speak, and it really is about, you know, how has the city affected you? How it has affected me.
Starting. Well, specifically for me, I mean, I learned how to weave here. I mean, the main roots of my practice were formed and learned here. You know, I was lucky to be involved in the Fiber Material Studies department at the Art Institute, and if you know anything about the people that have taught there or walked the doors through there, it's some of the most like important and influential people in the craft, the textile world, and they happen to be some of my mentors, like Ann Wilson, someone who is incredibly impactful in the creation of textile work and where it stands in relationship to fine art and what defines it. So I think definitely coming to Chicago, I would have never found that facet in my practice. And so I feel like it's allowed me to do so much. Chicago is also, and maybe I'll go off on probably our next question, but it's such a accessible art scene. I think if you can think about it, you can find it here. There's always a warehouse space where you could have a show. There's a DIY apartment gallery. Like if you want to exhibit work here, you can find it. If you want affordable studio space to put your huge loom or press, like it's feasible here, which I think if we think about the New York scene or other places, it's a little bit more difficult. So there's something there about like just the accessibility and the freedom to create and be spontaneous here. I also think coming from Miami, which is a largely, everybody I grew up from Miami was from somewhere else. And the dominant language there is Spanish, not English. But when I came to Chicago, although it's a very diverse city, I saw it to be quite segregated. And there's areas that are incredibly wealthy and then suddenly incredibly impoverished. And they exist right next to each other. I think we all know that. And there's this like level of deterioration that, but also like hope and growth that I see in this city. And I think for me, that's really where I've like leaned into slow, methodical hand stitching as like a form of meditation and growth. Like a lot of my works we kind of didn't see, but they are a lot about plants, about fauna, about backyard plants, living room plants, and how they grow and prosper and thrive and fail. And I think it's sort of evocative of what I see in the city. You know, there's the grittiness, the grind, the residue, and then everything that comes out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree that, you know, you cannot live in the city and not be hugely impacted by it. You know, for me, moving here also contributed to how I approach the medium I'm working in. Like I was, you know, I started printing in Indiana, but when I came here, the Center for Book and Paper Arts, that was a part of Columbia College, really embraced me. And, you know, I found a second home there when I was doing a residency. And sadly, that place has, you know, really now changed and lost a lot of those programs. But I found a community immediately that took me in the printmaking community, which I think is so generous and wonderful, you know, through organizations that are self-started, like the Chicago Printers Guild. You know, there's all the different facets of printmaking here that you can get involved in, and the broader community as well. You know, I'm somebody that also teaches art, and I think my work with students has been an incredibly huge part of my work, because a lot of people I work with come from you know, immigrant backgrounds. I work with a lot of Latinx students. I work with a lot of students that are second generation or you know, have different immigrant backgrounds, and that's really contributed to my sense of community in the city and my sense of belonging. Just to reflect back on previous question, because I think it's within that kind of modeled group of people that I have found the closest thing I could to some place where, you know, it made sense for me to be. So I think that Chicago is special in that way, and then also I think just the visual aesthetics of the city and the history, the incredibly rich history of the city leaves its mark on anybody that is here. And I'm somebody that's still learning, even though I've been here for 15 years. I feel like I'm just like scratching the surface of the incredibly rich, like political, you know, history of the city, social history of the city, and how that's related to our country, which I think is really, you know, that's why I think it's also really exciting to be here, because I think it's a very special place, you know, from that kind of vantage point as well.
Yeah, for me, it has a big impact, like to live here in Chicago, because it was a huge change in my career. I used like to make paintings, so but it was in the process of being bored about the media. So so I visited Mexico first in a residence. So I have like these kind of things like going around my brain. Like and when I moved to Chicago, so So I saw a lot of painters that for me was like a kind of like a, but
That's how I
just
feel.
yeah, just walking around like with my wife, and we were like walking in Oak Park neighborhood, and we found this small print shop, and right away like I started working in the print shop, and I never painted again. So then it was like a kind of like a, just like also the embrace of the Mexican community in Pilsen, that mostly they adopted me. So being a Nicaraguan, the only Nicaraguan, that it was like everybody was like, what you are doing here in Chicago with this kind of winter? And but I think it was like a kind of like also just to get involved like with the community, to have the same struggles that you are having, and just like to start working together and just making change also in the community. I'm part of a collective that is called the Instituto Gráfico Chicago, is the Graphic Institute of Chicago, and it was funded because it was like a lack of representation of Latina printmakers in the city. So we were like looking to shows that it was like a no Latinx, no Latina. So, and that is the wonderful thing in this city, that if it's not there, you could create it. So, and we have been for 12 years making these free, affordable festival every year at the National Museum of Mexican Art. So, in just, you know, like sometimes our communities, they don't think that they belong to those cultural spaces, and I think it was the way like to approach to the community, and being more welcoming, and I think like that is the wonderful thing about Chicago.
So I think being the senior person here, I think maybe 50 years ago, when you're talking about the art scene, it wasn't anything like this. And so you really had to struggle. And the fact that I had been living in Sweden and had had a number of shows in Germany and in Sweden, when I came here, automatically, because I used clay, I was not a sculptor. People would not accept my work as being a sculptural work because it was clay. They automatically told me, go to this other place that sells. I have nothing against functional work, because functional work is beautiful, but I thought of myself as a sculptor. As far as, on a different level, as far as Chicago, as an immigrant, what Chicago meant for me, the people were very supportive, but I think that most of all, I loved the lake, and I loved nature. I felt most at home in nature. And growing up in Mumbai, we don't have, well, we have the monsoons, but we don't have seasons. And for me, the seasons were a miracle, that I could plant something in the fall and then have a beautiful tulip in the spring. It was like mind-blowing the first time I did that. And so that wonder that spring brings, I think, is just amazing. And then being by the lake, that was another place where I could find peace and just meditate. And so I think that nature is where I feel mostly at home, and it's beautiful in Chicago.
I love that you brought that up. I was just thinking about that today, the experience of actually seeing seasons. In Miami, there's nothing but summer for your whole life. And so when I came here, that cyclical nature, almost like the dormant period that happens, and then the reawakening that happens later. There's something to that, I think, that appears in the work, where it's both, I feel like for me, it's both icy and warm, or it's both alive and also kind of deteriorating.
I also felt the first time I saw spring that it was magic. It's like the closest thing to magic. I could not believe there was snow and it melted. Yes. It's very basic, but very, very, very wonderful to kind of experience for the first time as an adult. Thank you. I appreciated reading about your exhibitions. I visited the ones that are open, and the kind of spirit of the exhibitions is that it speaks to different communities of artists that call Chicago home, whether it is a diasporic group, you were in an exhibition of immigrant artists, self-taught or craft-oriented artists. Could you share a little bit about the context of the exhibitions that your work is in as part of Art Design Chicago, and how your work fits within them?
You start this time. I'll go after.
I have two pieces at the Ukrainian Museum. Those were early works which, right in the beginning, the work was always telling stories about my life. You know, I had two kids, and managing the kids and managing an art career there was always that struggle between the two. And so those tell stories of that. You know, one of them is called "It Takes a Village," and it does take a village to raise a family. And so it was sort of a celebration of all the different people who have helped me to just be able to be an artist and to work here. And the second one relates more to the idea of being put in a box, because automatically you're put in a box. You're a mother, so then you have this role. You're an immigrant, you're in this role. You work with clay, then you're in that role, you know. And so that piece talks about being in a box and how society puts you in different boxes. The pieces that are here, one of them is, I don't know if this says, yes, one of them is called Baggage Cart, and it deals with the baggage that we carry. It's based on a traditional baggage cart, which is called a hathgadi, which is a hand cart, which is a very common vehicle in India. And I was talking about, or at least in that piece, it relates to the baggage that we carry with us, the prejudices, the stereotypes, the institutional memories and how do we change that? So that piece was the baggage cart, and then the other piece is called the space in between. I was fortunate enough that the Evanston Police Department gave me their decommissioned long guns. And so I've done a series of works using the long guns. And it was mostly to get people to see the complexity of the violence that is committed, the visible and the invisible violence. And that it's not such a binary choice. We need to be able to talk about it and come to some agreement. And so the whole series of those pieces is based on that idea of understanding and doing something. You know, what is our role in that, in changing that idea of violence?
Do you want to go next, or?
I'm also in that same exhibition. I believe it's called Agency, Craft from the 1970s and 80s and Beyond. And I'll talk about one of the pieces in the show. So I also do upholstery work as part of my practice. So oftentimes I'll pair wall pieces, textile wall pieces, with often antique furniture pieces that have my textile sort of embroidered or wrapped around the pieces themselves. I started that practice several years ago when I was thinking about growing up in Miami. I spent a lot of time going to, let's say, random people's houses that my mother would clean. I would kind of go and do jobs with her. And so oftentimes we were in these beautiful homes, and I would just literally be wandering around these houses as my mother cleaned and I pretended to help. And I remember thinking a lot about the furniture that made those places feel like home to those different kinds of people that were very different from the home that I had at the time. And so I spent a lot of time here in Chicago actually collecting really abandoned furniture pieces that were on their last legs, literally. and giving them new life through my textiles that were imprinted with imagery and drawings and translations from my life, from my impressions, from my patterns, from my photographs, and kind of reclaiming my narratives onto those furniture pieces that were pieces that would have never existed in my home. It would have been something that just wouldn't have fit. And so I was recently asked by a good friend of mine to give life to a piece that belonged to her grandparents. It was an old settee that they had had in their family for about 50 years. And I thought that was a real big honor to hand that to me and essentially say, do whatever you want with it. And so for me, I took that as a real challenge, both like looking back at the textiles that were on the settee originally, and then drawing from my own pool of what's going on in my life. What are the things that I'm drawing and imprinting, and what are my struggles and frustrations with right now, and how do I combine and mesh the two? And so the piece kind of came together really nicely with some wall pieces that were also kind of documenting the last 6 months and kind of the ups and downs of just dealing with, deciding what you're going to do with your life, art career, married life, struggles, financial situations, the political climate, and just kind of putting all those things together. And I think part of the premise of that exhibition is, agency, right? It's like, what are the struggles that artists are grappling with to create the work that they make? And how does like the production process get influenced by those obstacles, whether they're financial, whether they're being from outside of the art world or being, self-taught or etc. And so I felt like in a lot of ways that furniture, what it represents for me in my life was sort of this barrier that I wanted to reclaim through my own almost like stamping of my impressions onto these pieces that I thought were things that I could never have in my own home.
It's like, yeah, it's like a John Wayne moment, Who's gonna pull the trigger first? So I'm in an exhibition at the Newberry Library. It's called Making an Impression, Immigrant Printing in Chicago. It's curated by Jill Gage, and it's focused on history of printing in Chicago by showing like some prints that were made by famous artists, but mostly focusing on work of like the unnamed printers who created the bulk of printing since Chicago was incorporated and even before then, because so many folks that ended up making work came from they were immigrants in the city. There's also 3 contemporary artists in the show, and I'm one of them. And my work that is in it was the work that was projected, the big prints that said home, body, land. And just a little bit about that work is it's actually modular. So the prints, each print has a word on it, home, body, land, and then there's a print that says is mine. So I'm asking curators to like install it in a configuration that makes sense to them. So my thoughts about the work is that I thought of it as home, body, land, kind of being in a cyclically installed poetic narrative. Like home is my body, is my land, is my home, is my body, is my land. But the Newberry installed it as like body is my homeland, which I think works really well also. So I'm into that. I'm really interested to see how different people will take this language and like interpret it. But the idea behind it, of course, has to do with this sense of carrying your land within you, if you will, which I think is an interesting thought for me, but it's also is an empowering thought for me, because it means that where I'm from is kind of always with me, and it also means that when I am with other people, we get to create our land, like even if we are on another land. I mean, that has kind of a colonizing tone to it. But the idea is that I think that of essentially that freedom that you get to claim, as you are claiming your body is like your space, right? And asserting it as a value. So I'm really interested in, seeing how different people display this work, and I'm super honored to be in the Newberry exhibition. I think that, such a fantastic institution for print and beyond.
I'm gonna be into it next spring. Open the show, and I think the title of the show is Chicago's Catalyst: Immigrants, Communities, Nourish, Self-Talk Artists. And I'm gonna have like a 5 prints, and they are talking about immigration, and they are from 2000, I think 2011 to 2020. So it's kind of like some of them is portraying some of the journals the immigrants uh, made, like just coming to this country, and but also it's like one of the things that I like, that they choose this body of work, that many of them have been collaborating with another organizations and print shops, and with an idea that it's not only a piece like that is representing, but it's also like helping to fundraisers, to helping those organizations, and also like a seeing, also for me, like a seeing how my work has been changing a lot, and also like just I think mostly uh, the part that the way that I have been learning, just like working, collaborating with different organizations. So, and I think like one of the last series that I did, that is like the essential for your colonizer comfort. I was learning a lot about farmer workers, and just learning about facts and numbers and economy. And it was so another thing, another narrative that we don't listen, neither from Republicans or Democrats. So, and I found out that 70% of farmer workers are undocumented, and they produce a revenue of $9 billion a year. So, and those people that were like working during the pandemic while we were at home. So, and just exposing, they didn't receive the check that we get, because they don't have like any papers. So it was like a kind of like the changing of my work, and I think also it is just giving the place to those people that they are invisible, that they are not out, that the media is not talking about, that the politicians they are not talking about. They are just coming to us when they need it, when they are desesperated, where they were thinking they are gonna lose the election. So, but they are not talking about what we are giving to this country, how we are changing this country. So I think for me that the part is like what is very exciting about this show. And another thing is like many of the names in the show I don't know who they are. They are new for me, so I'm learning about it. But I found out a good friend of mine, Piloto Nieves, that is a sculptor, is gonna be in the show. So, and he does a lot of like work with communities and working with disposable things with trash and make these beautiful sculptures. So I'm looking forward for this exhibition.
Amazing. I wanted to kind of end the conversation with thinking about the exhibitions as an invitation for people to come and see them. The exhibition here is closing this weekend, so make a special trip for that. It sounds like there's a full weekend of programs planned, so we encourage you to take a look. And the exhibition at the Ukrainian Institute is open for a few more months
Till January.
until January, and then we have 2 more exhibitions to look forward to. So thank you all. I think we're close to time. So, okay, good. Okay, we do have time for questions from the audience. So, yeah, love to hear from you.
This might sounds funny. So when I'm thinking about like getting to the art world, there's almost also a immigration kind of experience. You need to learn new language, especially contemporary arts. You need to be recognized by the elders in the community, which is give you a pass. You need to work in like unrelated jobs to to survive in the experience. So I would love to hear more. Like you are. I imagine you're mostly working in the contemporary art realm. How did you learn that language yourself, and how did you discover your audience?
I love that question.
So are you saying how did you get started in?
How did you learn the contemporary art language, and how did you discover your audience?
So I think I'm a little bit confused by the question. As to how did you learn the language of contemporary art?
Yes.
And that's something, I think for me, I mean, being self-taught, I'd go to the library, I did the residencies, and learned from other people.
Just
I
so
think it's
sim-
Can
sorry.
I
Yeah.
answer it?
Go ahead.
I think, I don't know if this is on. I'll just leave it up. Okay.
I think it's a lot of stumbling. I mean, I don't know about everybody else,
Yeah.
but I say this to my students so many times too. It's like, it's not a straight path. It's not, I'm not becoming a doctor and I know exactly the trajectory to get to X, Y, and Z. And so there's a lot of daily moments of being completely unsure about what you're doing. And right now I'm a full-time artist. That's like how I support myself. I own my own building. That's what I do. And I still feel like, I don't know what's next. How am I going to continue this trajectory? And I think by just putting your head down and continuing to make work and to be, what you're saying about the library, like continuing to be curious.
Yes.
Like for me, that's traveling, that's wandering the city, that's researching, going to residencies, as much, I'm gonna call it enrichment, as you can get your hands on. Because eventually you live out that life, and artists come in all shapes and sizes, and we can talk in whatever terms that we like. I don't think there needs to be an art talk that is always communicated or portrayed. Artists, I've learned throughout the years, especially in Chicago and abroad, that they can take all sorts of shapes. They don't need MFAs and they don't need these certain qualifications to define that. And a lot of times, throughout several years, maybe you work an office job and then you make your studio work and you grapple back and forth between the two.
I think also all the experiences go towards making your art. I mean, while I worked in advertising design, that has really helped me in my art.
Teaching.
Some of so teaching. I started a Peace Foundation. The things that I learned whilst doing that has helped in my art making. So I think that it's life in general. It's just continuing to engage.
I liked your question in terms of like framing the art world as a metaphor for migration, and I think that, something that I've come to appreciate in Chicago and in my life is to think about many art worlds, and then think of it as many more opportunities for you to find where you belong within the very different communities of people who call themselves artists. And that feels like a more kind of, I don't know, generous and fun way to think about where you want to move in the art world.
I think like in my case as a self-taught artist, it's more difficult to get into the art scene per se. Uh, I always like when I'm going and visiting universities and I have like to talk with the students about how I'm doing. And one of the things that I said like just get your degree. I don't have a degree, so for me I can go to a school and teach art. I could be the best like doing in what I'm doing, but I don't have a degree. But also like when you have a degree, it's open another doors. Like you have access to grants. You have like a support from grants from the city. And I think here in Chicago, the only grant that I know that is for self-taught artists, it was they started in 2019 by the Chicago Artists Coalition. So I think it's kind of like a difficult to have a recipe of uh, how to learn that language. Like right now I'm sitting here and having this opportunity and I think I have been like showing in the last year in different exhibitions that they are supported by the Terra Foundation. I don't know why, but I'm there, you know. But it's just kind of the scenes also, like just keeping working and working and working, and someone is gonna see your work.
Because you're just present, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just like being there and being visible through the years, it's somehow you become a part of that community by force, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think you just have to like do it, like exactly what you're saying, just showing up, I think is a lot. You kind of have to be, I mean, in my opinion, you have to be like, especially if you're not affiliated with a major institution, you have to be like a little crazy. I think that's really important. And then the second part is you have to say that you are it. So like you have to be crazy and then you have to just be like, yes, I am. I'm the artist. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
And then sometimes you're on the stage and sometimes you're in the audience, and that's, you know, being aware of that, I think is helpful.
I'm working with an artist at Hyde Park Art Center who's an elder. His name is Robert Earl Page, and one of the things that he says constantly is, if you sit at the table long enough, they have to bring you the chips. And I hope that people don't have to sit as long as he has
Because he's an amazing
been sitting,
artist.
because he's an amazing artist and he has deserved the recognition for many, many years, but it's a lesson.
Yeah, I mean, but also like, you know, as what Indra said earlier, like the city don't recognize you as a sculptor when you first arrive, right? Then there's this like, you know, dancing, learning what are the rules here, and you entering through institutions, then to get people to know you. So there's like this dance, but also a lot of this power dynamic in the background. So thanks for your answers.
Well, on the topic of working and everything, what was like the longest period that maybe within your practice or discipline you were maybe not creating, took a step back to kind of be, you know, reframe? I think of how Carlos was talking about like transitioning from painting over to press. So like, were there any periods in your life where you're like, is this even for me? And like, how did you get back into the groove of what you ultimately find true to yourself, which is expression?
I think for me, well, when I was doing the transition, for me, I was very excited because it was a new media, and I went like to learn, and I was visiting a lot of like libraries. I was amazed, like just going to libraries here, and you just grab the books and take it to home, and just renovate every time. So I was just soaking all those books to learn more and just put it in practice and in the print show. But I think for me a period that I was so, I don't know, it was so affected. It was in 2018. It was a peaceful uprising in my country, and the government started, the police started killing students, and for me it was just uh, it's just coming back these memories that was uh, what I left my country. So it was a time that it was for me the struggle just to produce work. So how can I react to this part? Also being so far from my country, how can I deal? How can I deal with the news here, talking uh, or not talking about what was going on down there. But in some way it's kind of reflection how you have to deal with different things, like just dealing with different uh, issues that they are going around the world, right now, dealing with the scene of that's happened in Gaza, with the genocide. So this kind of thing is always affecting because I think that everybody is connected with all this kind of violence that is in another part of the world, because at the end we are gonna get affected too. So I think it's a time. Sometimes it's time of reflection and there are not doing I'm not doing anything, but it's just the way that you could start doing research and things, and after is coming the production of the artwork. Yeah.
I also think it's important to have other things that you're incredibly passionate about. In those moments where sometimes it's hard to make work when you see so much suffering, right? And around the world, and it's sort of what is the point? Or this is a very privileged position to be in, to be making art right now when you kind of see these horrible things that are happening. So I've taken sort of cycles where I revert to a passion for me is herpetology, is biology. I have a green thumb, my plants, my animals, and so I just dive in deep into that research, and that's thinking a lot about conservation, that's thinking a lot about what climate change is doing to our environment. So there's these other moments that you can still research, and I think we're all good at studying and being fascinated by things. That's what artists do, and they ask questions. And so I found it really important that now as much as I love being in the studio, I also have my other passion that I do, and I spend a lot of time focusing on herpetology and my plants and terrariums and things like that. And it feeds this other abstract language that I bring back into the work. And that could be other things too. I spend a lot of time running and thinking about going out into the world and experiencing life in order to reflect and make art about life, I think is crucial, and also healing and meditative.
Yeah, I think you're in that way. You're always informed by things around you. So I think even if you're taking a break, and you're not making work, you don't know how that's informing what you're gonna do next, right? And I think for a lot of us, maybe part of why we make work is because that's how we process the world around us. So inevitably we will return to it because it helps us make sense out of the world. And then whether what you're making is gonna be in a show or not, that's a different conversation, right? But you're still making things because it's what you do. And I think, that's an important part of how you deal with things. And that's how it is for me. I definitely had moments when I was why am I even doing this? And then finally it was oh, it's because that's like, I mean, it's silly, but it's like, basically you're like, oh, it's because that's the way I process my life, that's why I do it, and then, that feeds into my artistic practice, but it's almost like there's like a part of my practice that is personal, and then that folds into like a more public part of my practice, and maybe it's not super clearly delineated, but I just think that is important for me to acknowledge and to give myself that space to, just make things for me sometimes.
Thank you.
So for me, I have a ton of ideas. I've never had that problem of not having an idea, because there's always been, and the only time that I didn't work was after my second son was born, and my friends gave me an extra crib to put in my studio so that he could, while he slept, I would be able to work. And I didn't use it even once, because when he slept, I slept. And so I think that struggle between family and art has been one of the issues with me, and it has fostered some really beautiful ideas, because I think struggle is what makes us create, so I think just that experience of life is what will give you ideas and help you not be.
And we never get enough time.
Yeah, we never have enough time.
Even when
Right.
if people are full-time artists,
Right.
it still never feels like enough.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question?
Is there one more? Is there one more question?
I also feel like we've been talking for a really long time. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you, everyone. Thank you to our wonderful panelists and Mariela for moderating. I'd like to give a special thank you to the South Asia Institute staff for opening up their beautiful space to us, and also getting us started on this collaborative program. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art, the Newberry Library, Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art, and everybody for coming. There's refreshments in the back. I know we're over time, but please help yourself. I beg you, please help yourself.